Good evening. Welcome to the June 13th, 2012 meeting of the City of Lake Forest Plan Commission. I'm Jack Reisenberg, Chairman of the Commission, and at this time I'd like to introduce the other members of the Commission. To my far right, Commissioner Anderson. Next to me on the right, Commissioner Lay. To my far left, Commissioner Cushman, and next to him, Commissioner Ziccarelli. I'd like to welcome Commissioner Lay and Commissioner Ziccarelli to the Plan Commission. This is their first meeting. Welcome. Welcome. The first item on the agenda is recognition of former commissioners Tim Newman and Mark Shaw. I believe I can stand up there for the mic and call them up. Good. Gentlemen, let's go.
Or you can just pull it right off and hold it.
Yeah, well, I can't do that. I'm gonna miss Commissioner Newman. Yeah, thank you very much. But I'd like to, with these two guys, first of all, I'm glad you're here tonight. I've been with them for the whole time that I was on the commission, the 5 years that I was on the commission, I have one more. I thoroughly enjoyed working with both of you guys. You were my two anchors. Tim on the right, who kept me honest, and of course Mark on my left, who kept me on my toes. So I would like, on behalf of the city, on behalf of the Plan Commission and myself personally, I'd like to present you with these awards of service. You have your name tag.
Yes.
Yes. You might want to keep it in your office or something like that.
For example.
And Tim, I'd like to present that to you. Thank you again for all your service for your 5 years. I might want to say, you were with us for ERA. We went through that together. And of course, you did a little extra duty. They stuck around for an extra month at time and a half for the hospital, and which was quite an endeavor for us. So I want to thank both of you guys. I'm going to miss you, et cetera.
So a quick word.
Yeah.
Just want to say thank you to all of you. It's been a pleasure, and best wishes to Chairman Reisenberg and the entire commission moving forward. Thank you.
I ditto that comment, and I see that my old friend Augie Ziccarelli sitting in my chair, and his wife and my sister and I went to Purdue together. So, Augie, you make a fine and admirable replacement, and I have no regrets turning it over to you. Thanks again.
After 3 or 4 years, I'm sure he'll be able to live up there.
Thank you.
Kathy, I think I forgot to introduce you as representing at the meeting, representing the city. Now that I look at my notes, our next item of business is approval of the minutes from the May 22nd, 2012 Plan Commission meeting. Are there any corrections or requests for clarification? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed. The next item before the commission this evening is consideration of a request for approval of a zone change from OA, open area, to R4, single-family residential for lots 22, lots 23, and lots 24 in the Wedgewood subdivision. The properties are located on the south side of Wedgewood Drive, just east of Stratford Court. Are there any, on the part of the commission, Are there any conflicts of interest or ex parte contacts by members of the commission? Okay. Kathy, I think you will be the petitioner?
I am.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm actually speaking on behalf of Karina Walters, the Assistant City Manager, who very recently had a baby, so she's not with us tonight. This is a petition that is before the Plan Commission at the direction of the City Council. For a number of years, since I believe 2005, the City Council has thought about these lots and has wanted to proceed in some way to get them off the city's surplus property list. The properties that we're talking about are located in the very southwest corner of the city. There are 3 lots, 3 buildable lots in the Wedgewood subdivision. Immediately along the south of those lots is the city limits. The tollway is located here. LTD, a commercial trucking business, is located here, and Half Day Road is somewhere in this area, somewhere to the south. This is Old Mill Road up here, so that kind of gives you the picture of where the lots are. In 1979, a proposal for a planned cluster subdivision, single-family lot subdivision, was brought forward for this property in the very southwest corner of the city. The property totaled about 88 acres. 80 of those acres were zoned R4, which has a minimum lot size of 60,000 square feet, and about 8 acres of the property was zoned R5. As part of that subdivision request, there was also a request for a rezoning of the portion of the property that was zoned R5, which would have had a 3-acre minimum lot size. That was approved, so the entire 88 acres was zoned for R4. In 1979, the city, the Plan Commission at that time, and then the City Council did approve the subdivision. And the Wedgewood subdivision is outlined here in red. This subdivision was approved before the overlay district, the residential historic open space district, was approved. That's an overlay district that the Plan Commission has used recently to preserve open space, to allow lots to be smaller than the minimum lot size as long as the density is still met. Although we didn't have that overlay provision in place at that time, the planned cluster development did the same thing. So in looking at this subdivision, the Plan Commission at that time, working with the developer, identified certain areas that would remain, actually these 3, this area, and this area, that would remain as open area, as outlots. Those lots handle the detention, provide some buffer from the tollway, and provide a small open space area in the center of the subdivision. In 1998, as this subdivision was building out, the developer, who's actually here with us today, still lives in the subdivision. The developer came to the city and offered the city 3 lots, 3 buildable lots in the subdivision as a donation. In 1998, the city was seeing quite a bit of development. Certainly in the 80s, there was a whole lot of subdivision activity throughout the 90s and into the early 2000s. And at that time, the City Council was very interested in holding land for open space. So they didn't hesitate for a moment. There were a lot of lots selling. There was a lot of real estate activity. So they accepted the donation. You do have the resolution in your packet. That donation required that the city rezone the property to OA, open area. Open area zoning can only be applied to properties that are in the ownership of the city or an open lands organization. So those lots have been held since they were accepted by the city as essentially an outlot in the subdivision. What makes them different from these other outlots is that these are in city ownership and the city is responsible for any maintenance, although they were left in a natural state. For the other outlots, the homeowners association is responsible for any maintenance and is the owner of those properties. As I said, in about 2005, I don't remember who was mayor then, but a planning and preservation subcommittee of the city council was appointed. And one of the things that group did was to step back and look at all the city-owned property. They identified rights-of-way, they identified easements, they identified some property, put together a complete inventory, and identified whether to keep properties, whether to develop properties, whether to sell properties. And these 3 lots, as that group looked at it, they understood that the city needed to hold those lots until the earlier of 10 years from the date of approval of the resolution, or the time that the developer sold all the lots in the subdivision. So 10 years has passed, and the city council has repeatedly looked at these lots and really went through the thought process of saying, there are 3 lots that were originally approved as part of this subdivision. They're really not of any benefit to the city. The city council has recognized that holding these lots as open space is a benefit to certainly the neighbors in the immediate area. City council directed staff to have some meetings with the neighbors, which we did. We do understand that especially the closest neighbors would prefer that the city continue to hold these lots, and they continue to be wooded, and they continue to serve as a buffer from LTD and from the tollway. The city council has talked about different options. They've talked about selling them. They've talked about working with the homeowners association to see if the homeowners association wanted to acquire these lots, wanted to purchase them, hold them as an outlot, but be responsible for them. The city council hasn't yet authorized any action to sell these properties. That is not the Plan Commission's decision, but the city council's. City council has directed that the next step in this process is to have these rezoned to residential. The R4 zoning is appropriate. That was the zoning that was on the property before they were donated to the city. If the Plan Commission sees fit to make a recommendation to support the rezoning of the property, my expectation is that the city council will then continue discussions with the neighbors about options for the property. But the city council has been pretty strong in stating its intention that the city should not continue to retain ownership of these properties, that they are not benefiting the city as the whole, that they certainly, if sold, would generate property taxes, and the city would no longer be responsible for maintenance, of which I acknowledge that we've really done very little. We've left them in their natural state. In the staff report, you do have a recommendation in support of the rezoning. The criteria for rezoning are addressed through suggested findings in the staff report. And just in summary, those findings do state that the R4 zoning, if applied to these properties, would be consistent with the zoning in the surrounding areas, would allow development consistent with the pattern of development in this neighborhood, and would be consistent with what was anticipated when the original subdivision was approved. So if you choose to do so, it will be appropriate to forward a recommendation to the City Council. Thank you.
Thank
I'd be
you.
happy to answer any questions, and I think
Okay.
I'll move
What were
back
you
over
gonna-
there.
Okay, whatever. Questions from commissioners to staff, who also happens to be the petitioner? Beginning with,
If I
yeah,
may.
sure, Commissioner
Can you
Cushman, right.
bring us up to speed on the discussions with the homeowners association and whether there's any interest expressed on their level?
I know you have representatives in the audience. I have a clear understanding that the neighboring residents would prefer, at least some of the neighboring residents would prefer that these lots not be sold and not be developed, that they be preserved in their wooded character. There's been some initial discussion about whether the homeowners association is interested in acquiring these properties. I don't know that there's been a final decision on that. At one point in the discussion, we looked at perhaps swapping these outlots for the outlot in the center. That really wasn't workable. So there is no conclusion, other than the city council has been very clear with us that their intent is to dispose of these properties, either through sale or through some kind of a negotiation with the homeowners association.
Is there any particular reason why we would go about the rezoning now versus just, I mean, any respective purchaser would certainly look at the surrounding zoning and assume that it could be rezoned to R4 as a condition of purchase. Is there a reason why we would go through this process today versus when that
On the
takes place?
advice of the city attorney, the city council has identified rezoning as a first step before they could actually market or really enter into discussions about selling the properties. They aren't marketable because OA zoning can only be applied to city-owned property.
Okay.
That's
I'm
it?
fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner Ciccarelli?
Yeah, Kathy, a couple questions. It doesn't appear that those 3 lots play any kind of key role in the stormwater management of the subdivision. Is that true?
That is true. There are detention ponds elsewhere in the subdivision. There is a small area of wetland on the westernmost lot that was identified. We did have a wetland study done. That is an isolated wetland. It could be mitigated. The city council has had discussion about whether it would be mitigated before they sold the lots. It could also remain and the lot could be developed. But these lots have been factored in, have been calculated in, and the ponds and the stormwater management system has been sized, assuming development of these lots.
Maybe just a second question. It appears that it's a mature neighborhood. The streets are in good shape, the curbs are in good shape, the street trees are mature. And this is kind of in the remote area of any construction traffic would pretty much have to travel through an established neighborhood to get there. My question would be, is part of our permitting process a public restoration bond that in the event something gets damaged, the homeowners association or the city would not be liable for making the repairs?
Correct. We do require the posting of a public restoration bond. The city also assesses a truck impact fee based on the miles traveled within the city and the number and weight of the loads.
Commissioner Anderson?
Kathy, help me understand what this is, I guess it's a feel thing. What is the objective of the city? Is it in fact, it's obviously to get it off the rolls of the city's property rolls, but is it to get tax revenue? Is it to sell these for gain? Or is it the fact that they want to not have it on their roll for maintenance and the responsibility of a property that's associated with that?
All of those things have been mentioned by the city council and
Okay.
by the, what is now the subcommittee of the city council
Right.
titled the Property and Public Lands Committee. Whether ultimately the council decides that getting it on the tax rolls is less important and just getting rid of it is more important, you know, that could lead to perhaps some successful discussions with the homeowners association. I think the council feels a fiduciary responsibility to address these properties that are
Okay.
not of benefit to the overall citizenry. And so I can't speak to exactly at the end of the day which will be their priority, but all of those have been identified.
Okay.
Commissioner Lay? No question? I have, I guess, a couple, Kathy. Are we referring to that as an outlot in the center? Or just open area?
The
It's
one in the center?
Yeah. mhm,
Yes,
mhm.
that is an outlot of
And
the
what
subdivision.
is in that? Is it just open area?
It's an open area, and again, I think residents of that area will be able to speak to that more directly
Uh-huh.
than I can.
Okay.
It is not a developable lot.
Oh, it is not a developable lot. Okay. I'm curious as to why there is a homeowners association. I mean, are they responsible for the roads? Are they responsible, normally when you have a homeowners association, there is a level of responsibility generally to cover things that might not ordinarily be covered in other communities within Lake Forest. They don't do the snow plowing, maybe they do overall landscaping, or they responsibility for the streets. Why would there be a homeowners association
In this
here?
case, the homeowners association, these are public streets, so the homeowners association is not responsible for the streets or for snow plowing. But there are outlots, there are detention ponds on those outlots. The homeowners association is responsible for those detention ponds. They may periodically need to be dredged. The homeowners association, in this case, also has, I don't know if I have the right title, but an architectural review board. It is an active association, and they look at what's being done to properties, and they communicate with the city. So, and I'm sure they may do other things, but those are the two primary reasons.
Okay.
So it is different than some subdivisions where there are private roads.
Right, exactly. And then just a point of clarification. What's in front of us tonight is not the decision regarding the disposition of the property. What's in front of us tonight is just a request for approval of a zoning change from OA to R4?
That's correct.
Okay, fine. Okay.
If I may, just on a follow-up.
Sure.
I'm still a little baffled by the process that we're attempting to undertake. If two potential disposition possibilities would be a homeowners association potentially willing to place a price tag on these three assets and making the city happy with respect to their disposition objectives, their first order of business, in theory, would be to petition us for a rezoning back to what we're about to zone away from, correct? As would the Open Lands Association people if for some reason they would become interested in acquiring the assets. So why wouldn't, and the city, the only reason you'd rezone the property in the first place is to maximize value, to allow it to be sellable at a higher value. But in this case, the surrounding zoning is so clearly R4. The city controls the process, so there's no contingency with respect to any prospective purchaser having misgivings about their ability to rezone. So again, I'm back to why would the city attorney recommend that we go through this process today rather than just putting for sale signs on the lot and then addressing this at a later date?
The council has been working through these properties since 2005, and I think they have tried to explore. We have talked to Open Lands, we have talked to the Homeowners Association. We can't, the city council, if they wanted to market these lots today, they could not do that as OA.
Why would that be true? I'm curious why that would be, though. I mean,
well, for one thing, the city council has a property disposition policy which states in order certain things they need to do. It is a policy that they've adopted by resolution. It outlines the steps that they need to take. They need to get an appraisal, they need to rezone, they need to review the zoning on the property, and if so, properly rezone it. And then there are certain other activities that they have to take before they would actually go out to the open market with the property. So the council has an established process that they are obligated to follow with respect to disposition of any property.
but
So
I guess my question is, does this process make any sense?
Well,
I mean-
it's part of the whole vetting process of putting something out there, making it clear the city council's intent is that these properties were originally approved for residential development, and they have made the decision that is an appropriate use in the future. Again, the discussions about these properties have been going on for a number of years, and there have been many different conversations with many different groupings of people, and the council has decided that they want to move forward. They want to have these lots prepared to sell if that's what they choose to do. So they've asked that the Plan Commission consider this at this time.
Commissioner
I have another question. So with an OA designation, can you actually, I mean, can you sell or transact an OA piece of property? I mean, maybe, is that the issue, is that you can't do that with an OA designation? Or do we actually have private owners of property that are actually designated as OA? Open.
Homeowners associations own property that is zoned OA.
Okay.
But individual property owners, no,
Okay,
cannot.
so that's the only situation outside the city or maybe open lands?
Correct.
Okay.
It clearly is
Just wanna
property
clarify
that
that.
has been designated not developable. So there's an inherent conflict there between trying to market property that's zoned OA.
Okay, that's helpful.
and It's a timing issue.
I have one final question. Kathy, did you say as part of your commentary that there was a proposal to swap the OA, the open area in the center of the development for the 3 properties?
I wouldn't call it a proposal, but it's certainly something that we tried to identify all options as we've gone through these multiple discussions.
Uh-huh.
And that was one of the options that was put out there.
By whom? Well, it would be by the city, I guess.
By the city, but I think it was suggested by some of the neighbors, it was suggested by aldermen. We've brainstormed and really looked at different ways that the city council might achieve its goal to dispose of these properties. Certainly the properties, it wouldn't be a 1-for-1. You wouldn't be looking at getting 3 lots if you made the swap for that internal OA. It would require an amendment to the plat of subdivision, because that is an outlot on the plat. And my guess that is if we made that kind of swap, you would hear from a different set of neighbors who probably have gotten used to that outlot, which was there, identified as an outlot at the time they bought their property, unlike these lots, which were identified as lots similar to the other lots in the subdivision.
Okay.
I had a follow-up question.
Sure.
Kathy, following up on Commissioner Kuchman's question, let's assume a set of circumstances in which the commission, for the sake of argument, the commission recommended approval of a rezoning. It then goes to the city council. Let's assume the city council adopts that recommendation. Let's assume then in the course of negotiations, the homeowners association would come forward and say, we would like to purchase it. Would then the homeowners association be required to come back through the process to get it OA rezoning back to OA, if that's what they chose to use it for?
It would likely have to come back not only as a rezoning, because it would be in the hands of the, not in the hands of the city, but then in the hands of the homeowners association, but we would also need to do a plat amendment so that it was clear that we were dissolving those 3 buildable lots.
I see. Thank you.
Okay. Public testimony. Are we gonna have any public testimony? Or is anybody, okay. All right, then I would like to swear, I need to swear you in. Okay, any,
One question first.
sure.
I did sign up for the ability to cross-examine.
Uh-huh.
I'm not quite sure when in the process that's supposed to happen.
Well, if you look on the agenda, do you have the agenda in front of you?
I don't.
It doesn't matter. It's, let me help you out here, because I've got it in front of me. The next item on the agenda would be public testimony.
And
So,
cross-examine.
then there's cross-examination. Okay, but cross-examination is to ask questions of Kathy, not necessarily just to have additional public testimony. Okay. So, is there any public testimony? All right, anybody who plans on speaking, would you please stand? Okay. Do you solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you are about to give or have previously given is true and correct, to the best of your knowledge. Okay, fine. Um, Okay, depending upon if you have an order, or whoever is, wants to, speak. When you go to if you go to the podium, state your name, and address, and we'd be delighted to hear from
There
you.
you go. Bill Kaufman, 1865 Wedgwood Court,
Mhm.
and my wife and I live there. I'm the original developer.
Oh.
And I just wanted to make note, as requested, in Kathy's notes, it says that I donated with the interest of moving the subdivision forward and due to the fact that these lots adjacent to a non-residential use in Bannockburn were less attractive. And it's not exactly that wasn't the purpose. The purpose was to protect the subdivision. I live in the subdivision, I didn't at the time, but I had been selling lots and I had been selling homes, and when I say selling, I was building homes, and I was building high-end homes, and Bannockburn came in and rezoned LTD. LTD was nothing when I developed the lots, and all of a sudden they came in and they put in, 17 loading docks, and they originally wanted them facing the tollway, but then through negotiations, they ended up facing them directly towards Wedgwood. And I, in good conscience, said, those are heavily enough wooded. I could probably build a house in there, but I don't want to take the phone call from the guy the first time they load up those loading docks. And I also felt that I would have to build a less valuable, below market in order to market those homes. And that would be in detriment to what I still had to the north side and what I had developed. So I went looking for some place that would hold it as open land. I could have gone to a charity, I could have gone anywhere. I came to the city because I thought it would be remaining open land. That was the whole purpose of doing it. And it's adjacent to, it's funny you mentioned it's Wedgwood, but in actuality it's Oak Knoll is directly adjacent to it. And it's funny because these lots are the lowest lots. If you go out there, you'll see that some do retain water. They happen to be right next to a cut in the berm to the tollway that was required by the city. And that cut is not really necessary because there is a sewer that goes across to the tollway. And so they have the noise coming through the cut. And when you sell these lots, you're going to have to face the market facts of what they're going to be sold for. And if you think you're going to be increasing your tax roll, in actuality, in my opinion, especially the houses in Oak Knoll, you're going to be bringing those values down. You're going to make that more difficult to sell existing houses in the area because the banks are going to be looking at the refi on them. It's going to be harder to qualify. And you can say, yeah, let's get rid of them. Let's sell them for what we can get. I really question whether it wouldn't be more valuable, and it was my idea to come up. The open area in the center is actually, it was labeled a park. That was supposed to have been a park, but the park didn't want to put a park. The park district didn't want to put a park in it. There was a time when all of a sudden the insurance rates went crazy, and they didn't want any parks out there anymore. So it was approached to try and develop that as a park, but it couldn't be developed as a park. And I'm not an appraiser, I'm a developer. But in my opinion, that center lot would sell easily for multiple times any of those lots down in the south end. Those lots still back up to the loading docks. Those lots still have the lowland. Those lots still have the cut in the berm. A second choice could be fill the cut in the berm. I am not an engineer either, but I assure you that overland flow has never been used. There has never been a circumstance where the drainage was required to go through that cut. It just stands to reason. So if you have any questions on it, I'd be happy to answer, but that's all.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Webb Bassick, 1951 Wedgwood Drive. I am the president of the Wedgwood Homeowners Association and am representing that group. I do have copies of my remarks, if I could. Can I
John, why don't you, thank you.
And I'm not going to try and go through these page by page. You're all capable of reading them. On page 2, it was at the city council meeting last year that this subject was first discussed, and the mayor directed the staff to work with the affected parties to seek an amicable resolution. One of the things that I'd like to clarify right away is we are not talking about just the Wedgwood Homeowners Association. With all due respect to Kathy, while she uses that term, as Bill Kaufman just pointed out, the Oak Knoll subdivision also butts up against those lots as well. So even if the Wedgwood Association wanted to do something, and there is no association for the Oak Knoll subdivision, there are impacted lots to the east of those 3 lots as well. And so this is not just a subject of a single association dealing with this, although the Wedgwood Association has some solutions that we'd like to recommend and certainly discuss. Members of our association, as well as people impacted from the Oak Knoll subdivision, have met twice with staff. At the last meeting, staff indicated that they needed to do further work and would contact us when the work was done. So I guess I'd like to clarify something that was said in staff's report. They said that to date, none of the options have been pursued by the residents. That's not an accurate statement. We weren't supposed to be pursuing options. We were told to wait for the city. And we are indeed waiting for the city. We were kind of surprised when the next item was to come before this commission, because we were waiting for the city to come back to us as part of these deliberations that the mayor had instructed. There's part of me that thinks that this very meeting tonight is premature because we haven't had the deliberations with staff that I think the mayor intended. On page 3, I see nothing in staff's report that tells you gentlemen about the litigation that went on with LTD Commodities and some of the residents of those affected lots. And frankly, staff didn't tell the city council about it either. In fact, one of the members of our board had to provide the city council with copies of that litigation. It went up to the Illinois appellate court level. LTD is not a trucking firm. They're a commodities firm. They are a catalog fulfillment operation. When Bill Kaufman first created this, that was an FMC warehousing operation, and its hours of business were something like 8 to 5. LTD Commodities brought in a 24/7 operation. And initially, the loading docks didn't pose any problems. The loading docks actually faced to the east. And then LTD Commodities, with the approval of Lake Forest, who serves as Bannockburn's building department, LTD Commodities did a massive increase in the amount of their structure, and after further discussion decided to relocate those loading docks with Lake Forest's agreement, relocate those loading docks so that they face north. And that started the lawsuit and the litigation. The members of that litigation class came to the city and asked for help and were rebuffed. They said, sorry, you're dealing with Bannockburn, we can't do anything about it. It was a 24-hour operation, and you can imagine the noise that I think there's 15 or 20 loading docks, so just imagine all of them filled with semis, and you never turn off a semi's engine, not while you're loading. So those engines were going 24/7, and people couldn't sleep. It was a real problem. The settlement at the appellate court level, seeing that staff has not provided you with that information, the settlement was LTD had to contain the shipping and not go after 8 o'clock at night. However, it appears that staff also hasn't told you about a legal opinion that's been received from the parties that were involved in that lawsuit that says if those lots are now put up for sale by Lake Forest, LTD will have a good case to reopen that agreement and shift back to the 24/7 operations that they'd like. Now, this sounds very technical. It has a very real bearing on what these lots are worth. You saw information in your material that suggests that the lots are worth $400,000 to $400,000 to $50,000 in a lot, not with the disclosures of the sound and light pollution that you're going to have there. There's no way anybody's going to pay for that. And there's the potential of that litigation being reopened and turning it into a 24/7 operation. I'm a little concerned that staff didn't bring that to your attention. We talked about it a lot during our 2 meetings. We talked about it at the city council meeting. On page 4, I want to keep moving along. On page 4, Huff and Huff back in 2000.
I would like to remind you that public testimony is limited to 5 minutes.
I am testifying on behalf of an entire association.
Right.
If
I would
we-
like to remind you that public testimony is limited to 5 minutes. Now, if you'd like a little bit more than that, that would be fine, but certainly not more than 7 to 10.
Okay? I'll try and move quickly. On page 4, Huff and Huff gave an opinion as to the sound coming from 294, based on their mathematical models. As the residents over there, I can tell you their mathematical models are incorrect. To my knowledge, they've never come back out to remeasure and validate what the correction to that is. The staff's report also shows that if every single tree was cut down on those 3 lots that we're talking about, it would only increase sound by 1 decibel. I'm sure you saw that. Starting on page 5, I'm not going to read every single one of them. I have over 16 studies from the Federal Highway Administration, from IDOT, from the UK, from 1990, 1970, 1972, all of which say the same thing. When you have a dense amount of vegetation like that, it is one of the best sound buffers there is, and it can buffer up to 10 decibels of sound. Now, staff indicates that it's only 1 decibel. The problem is that Huff and Huff wasn't right about the tollway, and we've got no guarantees of them being right here. And it doesn't make logical sense that you could cut every single tree down facing LTD Commodities, which was the subject of massive amounts of litigation, and have it only change it by 1 decibel. On page 7, staff didn't talk to you about light pollution. The lights at LTD Commodities are on 24/7, and they're bright enough that even my old eyes could read a book by them. That hasn't been discussed. On page 8, we don't understand how these come back in with R8 zoning. They were converted to the OA zoning, and the city didn't have to do that. We don't understand how you get 3 lots with an R4 zoning. It seems to us staff's trying to take advantage of something they've already given up once by converting them to OA. So by our calculations, they should only get 2 lots there, not 3. On page 9, there is an issue of wetlands. Staff's own report shows that there are issues of wetlands, and they indicate that they will have to be mitigated. It's my understanding that may require EPA approval, and my understanding further is that's a very, very lengthy process. Most of you are probably aware that was just litigated before the U.S. Supreme Court. Page 10, we're concerned about the lack of transparency, and there's been significant amounts of transparency. We have 3 alternatives that we'd like to suggest. One is to keep them open lands, give them back to our association. We'll take over responsibility for maintenance, cleaning, and liability for tree problems, which is not insignificant. In return, we will swap this open land. I'm a little aghast to hear staff suggest that that was considered. In fact, we have documentation from letters written almost a decade ago that have gone unanswered by the city, offering exactly to do that swap. That lot right there is 1.5 acres. It seems to me it could be made into 2 3/4 of an acre lots. There's no sound issues with respect to those lots whatsoever. And by the time you're done disclosing the sound problems, the light problems, the litigation on those 3 lots, I think you're gonna actually find out that you've got a better deal with the swap than you do with the 3 lots, even though staff would suggest otherwise. Another alternative is to say, okay, sure, rezone these lots, increase the rear yard setback to something like 60 to 75 feet versus the required 40 feet. Put a conservation easement across the entire backyard so that if any trees are taken out or die, they have to be replaced with like type of trees. Provide a footprint or square footage of a certain size that's consistent with the surrounding homes. One of the things that staff said is that they will assure that the home sizes are comparable to the other homes built in the area. Imagine you're a developer and you've got to build a house of 6,000 square feet. How many people are going to buy a house that size when you've got all the issues with respect to those 3 lots? Page 13. We're fighting hard on this one. We've been fighting hard on this one because nobody's representing us. I'd love to say that the city and staff are representing the issue, the residents of Lake Forest. They're not. They seem more bound and determined to raise the money, even though our mayor says in print the city's finances are in terrific shape. We've got some good options that we're trying to put before the city, and we're being rejected at every single level. Never once has the city been willing to talk to us about a swap. Never once. I'll conclude my remarks at this point. As I noted, I do have, I understand an opportunity for cross-examination.
Yes, you do.
Hi, Kathy Bassick. I'll try to be quick here as well. I am an impacted property owner. I also reside at 1951 Wedgwood. My home is directly across the street from the 3 lots that staff wants you to rezone and sell for a profit. I have served as past secretary of the Homeowners Association, and I served as 4th caucus rep with Michael A. I'm also an attorney. I am here once again to raise several questions the commission and staff should consider before deciding to move forward. The fundamental issue is this: whether a change in use from OA to R4 will introduce adversities to your tax-paying citizenry that wouldn't otherwise exist without the zoning change. And I think in order to consider this question, and before you guys do move forward, it is important to understand the history of these properties as they impact the neighborhood. As people have said, these open space lots serve as a buffer between the commercial uses to the south in Bannockburn, among those LTD commodities, an enormous mail order catalog fulfillment warehouse, and the residential neighborhoods. Surety Builders, the developer, and its representative, Bill Kaufman, who currently resides in our neighborhood, entrusted this property to the city as an open space buffer. We purchased in 1982, and then we built in 1985. LTD didn't exist at that point. So in other words, we did not come to the nuisance, if you will. Rather, it came to us. But now, some 26 years later, there's a good chance that our property value is less than it would have been had LTD not located here. In fact, 10 years after we built our home, the nuisance expanded, as people have alluded to. In 1994, LTD broke ground and grew its warehouse from 100,000 square feet and 8 truck docks to 400,000 square feet with 26 docks. 3 families along Wedgwood Drive in the Oak Knoll subdivision, Mr. Rohde is actually here tonight, he's one of the plaintiffs, apparently did not believe that the city was interested in supporting their efforts to quiet the noise. The Rohde family in particular reached out to the city for support when the noise and light pollution became unbearable and was keeping their kids from sleeping at night. The Rohdes told me they didn't even get response from the city or LTD when they met with the company reps at their offices. So in '99, They and others who share a property line with LTD were forced to file a complaint with the Illinois Pollution Control Board to stop that noise. The case eventually did reach the appellate court for the 2nd District. And I'm asking if council members, have you actually seen a copy of this lawsuit? I do have a copy. If you'd like to see it, I can provide it to you. But anyway, about $50,000 later, the roadies and their neighbors prevailed in this lawsuit. The court did rule that LTD violated the noise nuisance provisions of the Illinois EPA Act. Among other outcomes of the litigation, the Pollution Control Board fined LTD thousands of dollars, and as Webb alluded to, they had to shut down nighttime operations totally. Alternatively, the board said that LTD could build a noise wall, but that was a more permanent solution, more expensive, and they decided not to go with that course of action. The remedy they chose, which was to shut down the nighttime operations, is tenuous at best, because the plaintiffs and the surrounding homeowners have to continually monitor it. Gentlemen of the Commission, LTD and the recent expansion of the Interstate 294 are classic examples of negative externalities. And by this, I mean noise and light pollution generated by otherwise productive enterprises, in this case LTD and the toll authority, that affect others, in this case the homeowners, who had absolutely no choice and whose rights were ignored. Bill Kaufman, who donated the land, proactively attended a meeting with Bannockburn and spoke to the neighbors as the expansion was unfolding. At that point, like he said, he couldn't sell the lots in good conscience because of the adversities adjacent to the lots. So he gave them to the city, and it was really his understanding that they would protect them and that they would not be rezoned back to R4. A bit of history, he met with the then former city attorney, a gentleman by the name of Murray Conzelman, and an alderman by the name of Marion Pekarek. This was in '98. Mr. Conzelman wrote a memo to Bob Kiley after the three met, and I quote from that memo: Alderman Pekarek and I suggested to him, Kaufman, that the city, if it accepts the gift, would place an open space covenant on the property and proceed to zone the property in the OA zone to make it consistent with the retention ponds and the park already located in that subdivision, unquote. Gentlemen, no city staff member ever mentioned to Bill Kaufman that the city would attach restrictions to the donation. Finally, I would like to draw your attention to a number of references in some commission reports that I gathered that were from the past and other resolutions and memos generated by the city. The first one is a Proceedings of Plan Commission dated April 14th, 1999. I'm quoting Kathy Zerniak, quote, "There is no intention to develop the properties into a formal park, but simply to allow them to remain in their current state, to serve as a buffer between the residential neighborhood and the adjacent commercial area to the south, outside city limits," unquote. Another commission report to the mayor and city council dated May 10th of '99. Quote, "The properties are located at the south edge of the city and provide a buffer between the commercial uses in Bannockburn to the south and the residential development in the Wedgwood subdivision," unquote. That same plan commission report goes on to state, quote, "Staff explained that the proposed OA zoning would assure that the property would not be developed. Several neighbors pointed out that these properties in the current condition serve as a buffer from the adjacent commercial use to the south and the traffic generated by those uses," unquote. A final quote from that report: "The proposed zoning OA is consistent with the goals of the City Council to preserve open space and protect the value of existing residential uses," unquote. "The proposed zoning is consistent with and will enhance the surrounding residential subdivision," unquote. I have a question. How do you now, some 13 years later, divorce the original intent and purpose of Mr. Kaufman's donation, namely to protect the value of the residential uses, from the offensive commercial uses to the south? Sale and development of this property defeats the entire intent and purpose of the donation, does it not? Moreover, sale and development of these lots flies in the face of the findings of the Plan Commission report. that the OA zoning is consistent with the goals of the city council, quote, to preserve open space and to protect the value of existing residential uses, unquote. Council members, I hope that your goals are consistent with those as stated by your predecessors, namely to preserve open space and protect the value of all residential property owners in our great city. Can I leave you with some questions? Will the rezoning and development of this open space adversely impact the health, safety, and welfare of surrounding residents by allowing adversities that this open space was designed to buffer to infiltrate the neighborhoods? Will the city profit by selling this open space buffer for development at the expense of residents' property values, which will probably decline? If the donation and rezoning to OA was truly to provide a buffer from adjacent uses, and I think the various documents I quoted do support this view, how is it that the city can then justify allowing OA property to be sold into developable lots when those adversities still exist today, and I would argue have actually increased because of 294? Other than money, what is the petitioner seeking to accomplish by disposing of these lots? The city designated them as open area in the first place to maintain the property values and again to provide this buffer. What has occurred which now lessens the need to maintain the lots as open space? Actually, with the expansion of 294 and the increase in the number of loading docks, I would argue that the need to preserve this property as OA is even more important at this point. Thanks.
Thank you. Any additional public testimony? Hearing none. Kathy, I'm going to ask you a process question. Would it be better to do the cross-examination now or have staff response and then do cross-examination?
It's appropriate to do cross-examination now.
Okay. Cross-examination.
It shouldn't be too long because I think several of these have already been brought up. Kathy, you indicated in the report that a noise consultant had said that the trees do not contribute to noise mitigation. Was that a formal report that was issued to the city?
It was a review of an earlier report done that was, I believe, the city manager and city engineer worked with residents in your area when the tollway was being redone a number of years ago. And so that report was re-reviewed. There's no question your neighborhood is impacted by the tollway and other noise, but the location of these particular lots was determined not to be a key factor in changing the noise that you currently get from the various areas, the tollway and LTD. So yes, that report was not rewritten, but it was reviewed and it was reaffirmed that these three particular lots were not a key in changing the noise that currently impacts your neighborhood.
And you're referring initially to the 2008 memo from Huff and Huff that was addressed to Bob Kiley and you and others. Was there a formal letter or memo that came from Huff and Huff reaffirming that? Was it done orally? How was it communicated to the city?
The reaffirmation was done in writing.
It was.
It was.
And I'm sure we can get a copy of that?
Yes.
Great. You also indicated that in the staff's report that new resident, and this is a direct quote, new residences permitted on these lots will be similar in size to the surrounding homes. Is the city willing to guarantee that to include it as a restriction on those lots?
The size of the homes on these lots would be governed by the building scale ordinance, or could be governed by anything in addition that the council decides to put on these lots prior to sale. And the council, you've made several suggestions and have made them before, and the council certainly has indicated a willingness to consider whether a conservation easement should be put on the rear of the lots or whether the lots should be reconfigured. But unless the council puts a particular covenant on the deed, the size of the homes would be governed by the building scale ordinance, which governs square footage throughout the community. if that
But-
answers your
but-
question.
But in your report, you were very definitive. You stated conclusively, new residences permitted on these lots will be similar in size. That's an affirmative statement, and I'm asking if the city's ready to guarantee that. Could someone come in and build a 2,000 square foot home there?
Today, yes, someone could do that.
Okay, so that, and you'd agree that 2,000 square feet is not similar in size to the surrounding homes,
Yes.
right? So what is it that's allowing staff to make that affirmative statement, and does that have the guarantee of the city behind it?
The statement probably is written incorrectly, as you've described. The size of the homes on the lots would be allowed to be built consistent with the building scale ordinance. Now, again, the council has agreed to consider any limitations that the homeowners association might want to offer to put on there as covenants. So there has been an indication that there may be a willingness to put a covenant on that limits the size of the homes or requires a certain size. There's been no commitment to do that.
So what you're saying in your report is the word will is perhaps
Correct.
an
That's
inaccurate word.
inaccurate.
It may
Yes,
be.
it should be.
It should be could or maybe or something like that, okay?
Correct.
You indicated in April 2010 in the staff report, the lots were appraised between $430,000 and $455,000, I believe. I think a couple years earlier, they were much higher than that. Did you disclose the sound lawsuit and the noise and light issues to the appraiser?
The appraiser had free rein to look at all information. We didn't specifically discuss the lawsuit. We've been instructed by the city attorney that that really is a private matter. Certainly, they are aware of the proximity of the tollway, the proximity of LTD. They are also aware that behind these particular 3 lots, the loading docks are not directly behind these lots. They certainly are directly behind the lots in the Oak Knoll subdivision.
Excuse
So-
me, that's an inaccurate statement. They are directly behind 2 of the lots, and if you need me to, I'll bring pictures showing you that. You're right, they are not directly behind the most western lot. They are directly behind the other 2.
Well, based on our site visits and walking that site, we believe it, the most direct impact of the loading docks are on the Oak Knoll subdivision. But yes, the
you didn't-
appraiser had,
You didn't disclose it to the appraiser, and unless the appraiser was combing through Illinois lawsuits in Lake Forest and Bannockburn, they wouldn't have necessarily known about that. Is that correct?
we do not, we've been instructed that that lawsuit is not something that the city is involved in or.
I understand,
Okay,
but
we did not disclose it,
you
whether they
didn't-
knew about it or
you
not.
didn't-
I
You didn't
can't-
disclose it.
I can't
And
state.
certainly you would agree that if you had 2 identical lots, both exactly the same size, both wooded, both in Lake Forest, one of which backed up to LTD Commodities with all of the issues, the other of which was 3 miles away and had absolutely no sound issues, you'd agree that the one with no sound issues probably wouldn't have the same valuation as the one that backed up to LTD Commodities, wouldn't you?
Appraisers look at those types of situations all the time, so I'm sure that was taken into account.
But you'd agree those 2 lots wouldn't have a similar value?
Yes, I
Okay.
agree that lots are valued differently depending on their location and what they're near.
Kathy Bassick sent you a letter from the board of the Wedgwood Homeowners Association on December 2006. She also sent it to Bob Kiley with an offer to swap these lots. This is December of 2006. Why didn't you ever respond to that letter?
That offer and many other offers have been discussed many, many times. I think most recently, Ms. Walters, over the past couple of years, has asked for further indication from the homeowners association if there's a willingness either to acquire the property, one or more of the properties, or whether there's an interest of the larger homeowners association in a swap. So those certainly are scenarios that have been on the table, have been put forward. I think there's never been a clear indication of whether there's really an interest of the larger association in doing any of those. And I know we've had several meetings and have kind of talked around those issues, but.
I'm sorry, you're not answering the question. Why didn't you respond to a letter sent directly to you in 2006 And I'll put an additional question. Why was that letter a surprise to the city council when we met with them last year? Why didn't you forward that letter on to the city council?
There's been a tremendous amount of correspondence and meetings on this. You know, you have large files, we have large files. We have brought this before various subcommittees of the city council, and we take our direction from them on
Could I
on
remind
how
you
to
that you
proceed.
instructed Kathy Bassick to send that letter to you, and yet you failed to even respond to it? So your answer is, I don't have an answer, okay? The city hired DK Environmental to do a wetland delineation study, is that correct?
Correct.
Who was overseeing their work?
Karina Walters has been project manager of this project most recently. It's been ongoing for a while, but most recently she was involved with DK.
Why were they authorized to go onto our land, not the parkway, onto our land, and dig in our planting beds?
I'd like to ask just a little question here. The issue before us is a zoning issue. It's not a disposition of the property issue. I would ask you to think through some of your questions or statements, because it seems to me they're all about what would happen in the future, not the issue that is before us this evening.
Well, I guess one of the issues that's before you is, should these be rezoned out of OA into R4? And it's our recommendation that there are other alternatives that indeed they could stay as OA and be swapped for that center lot without having that center lot be rezoned to facilitate a swap and then have us come back.
Those options are always on the table, seems to me.
With all due respect, we have been rejected since 2006 from the city about those options. This is our first opportunity, without getting screened by staff, this is our first opportunity to present those to the commission, or to
Well,
any city body.
You certainly may go ahead. My only reminder was that the issue before us is a zoning issue, not a disposition of the property issue.
I understand. I'm also trying to paint a record that says staff has not been dealing on this issue fairly. And that lack of transparency and fairness is very troublesome, because I'm a resident of Lake Forest too. And I think they have as much right to look after our rights and protect our property as they do to make money. I'll move ahead. Michael Sullivan, according to your report, opined on these 3 lots and their value. Did you tell him of the lawsuit and the noise and light pollution issues?
We have not, we were not a party to that lawsuit, so no, we did not provide that information to anyone. Again, appraisers do thorough investigation, whether they were aware of that
So
or
your
not,
answer is no?
We did not
Okay,
provide
fine.
that report to
Did you ask him to also value the 1.5 acre lot that we've been talking about that the association was offering to swap?
No, we've had no, we were not authorized to do that.
You said in your opening remarks, you said a swap wasn't workable. Since there's been no conversations between the city and our association with respect to the swap, why did staff conclude that it wasn't workable?
We've actually had a number of conversations about that swap. As we brought it to, at our neighborhood meetings, we've had many conversations about that swap. As we brought it back to either the Planning and Preservation Committee, which predated the Property and Public Lands Committee, they felt that since there wasn't a clear indication of a couple things, a clear indication of support from the entire subdivision, particularly neighbors in that area immediately adjacent to that outlot that was designated from the beginning as an outlot, that probably was problematic, that there probably would be opposition to that. There was also an acknowledgement that lot certainly is not as large as the 3 lots, so it didn't provide the same type of opportunity. And there was finally there was the acknowledgement that as part of the overall subdivision, that area was identified as an opportunity for open space.
Do you remember why?
I don't. I wasn't here at the time of that subdivision.
On that lot stood the halfway house on the private golf course. That was where the little rest house was between the 9th and 10th holes. And it was a wooden and stone structure that had a little fireplace, and it was...
This is cross-examination, not public testimony.
Okay.
For whatever reason, it was identified as part of the subdivision, and it is recorded on the subdivision plat.
Okay.
But again, if the council has not made a final decision, they are just trying to move this discussion along.
I know it just
Since it has
it just bothers me when you tell us all the things that we haven't done, which are inaccurate statements. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Staff, response, petitioner response?
Sure. A couple clarifications. There was a question about why it would be appropriate to rezone these lots to R4, since they do not meet the 60,000 minimum lot size. Again, when this subdivision first came before the city council, the plan commission and the city council, the entire 88 acres was looked at, and this was a cluster, proposed as a cluster planned subdivision. What that means is some portions of it were kept as open space, and it was approved to allow the lots to be smaller, achieve the same density, but to allow the lots to be smaller to preserve some open space. This is consistent with what you've done recently with the Spiel subdivision, where we looked at the overall acreage, decided how many lots would be permitted, but then pushed the lots to one side and preserved, in that case, significant trees, a wetland. So R4 zoning would be consistent with what was originally in place on this property, would be consistent with what was approved through the rezoning. The city council has at times talked about, should these lots be reconfigured from 3 lots to 2 lots? That also is an option that's been on the table. I think the city council has worked very hard to identify all sorts of options, has had directed staff to have various discussions with the neighbors, and because we have not been able to come to a conclusion, the council has instructed us to take this next step, perhaps to force some of those discussions to come to a conclusion, or to set the stage for the sale of the properties. I did mention that the issue of the court case between the neighbors and LTD, that was a separate matter. The city was not involved in that. And so we have been instructed that really isn't an issue for our deliberation. There was a comment that the city of Lake Forest serves as a building department for Bannockburn. We review permits, or we review plans, issue permits, and do inspections. We have no zoning authority. We have no ability to tell someone what they can or can't do with the property. We do not review setbacks, review appropriateness of uses. We simply take the plans once a use is approved by Bannockburn and review those plans for consistency with the construction code. Our zoning code does not apply. I think those are the items that I wanted to cover.
Okay. Final questions from commissioners to staff. I guess we'll start with Commissioner Anderson.
A couple questions. Tell me, I'm a little confused about the discussion around where LTD backs up, and so suddenly it seems like the issue around noise, et cetera, has shifted from the tollway to this very pointed set of questions around LTD and the disruption that creates. As you look across the map, there's 2 lots there that really hit the bottoms, the south edge of this subdivision, and for that matter, Lake Forest. What is LTD? Does the back of LTD also affect what would be the 2 other lots that are left of that are currently zoned R4? Is this issue applicable to property that is currently zoned R4 as well? I mean, as well as the property zoned OA?
LTD stretches across from the corner, the 2 lots that are zoned R4 and developed in the corner stretches all the way across, as Mr. Bassick noted, into the neighboring subdivision, the Oak Knoll subdivision. When I walked the property, my perception, and we walked the lines in the backyards, is that the highest activity of that property actually begins to the east of the 3 open space lots, and really most dramatically affects the properties in the Oak Knoll subdivision.
Okay.
There's no question, these properties are adjacent to a commercial use,
Right.
and
But that's the case for properties that are currently zoned R4, as well as these 2 or 3 pieces of property, especially those 2 that are at the bottom edge, okay? I think you clarified my question around Lake Forest role or involvement in the approval as relates to Bannockburn. I mean, what you're basically saying, Bannockburn's using your services, it's not actually involved in a decision or approval process per se.
that's correct.
Okay. Was it clear, as best as the documentation show, from your perspective, that in 1998, when the property was donated from the builder, from the developer to Lake Forest, that those conditions included the 10-year time horizon in it? I mean, from what I've seen, it's quite clear, but there's sort of this commentary going on here that says that it wasn't clear or understood, that it was indefinite, and it seems pretty definite to me as we look at the documentation today.
There's no question when this donation was offered. Importantly, the developer could have instead chosen to just put a covenant on these 3 properties and said they're never going to be developed. But the developer did approach the city accepted the donation, and there's no question in 1998 the city was very, very focused on reducing density and preserving open space. So I certainly made all those comments. I advocated for the preservation of open space. However, when this got to the city council, they very deliberately said, we want them, a good thing, but they also said, we're going to put...
So that's the resolution from the city
Correct.
that was attached to that acceptance of the donation.
Correct. And I will say that it was my hope, it was my expectation that these would always remain open. But the council, at its discretion, limited the scope of the time period for which these would be open. And, you know, if we had a different council today, if times were different, maybe they would be. I can't talk about why, but the council made that decision to not bind themselves.
Okay.
Don, could I hitchhike on that
Sure.
one question? Because I think I missed part of it, and I want to, was your question or statement, or where you were going, that if this was to be a set aside in perpetuity, it should be done substantially differently?
Well,
In other words,
I guess
should
I
there
was,
have been
in my reading of this, it appeared to me that it was quite clear that those conditions, and you're saying from the resolution from the city, in accepting that donation were clear. The public commentary here would suggest that perhaps it wasn't intended or not clear, but that isn't how it turned out. And it's pretty well documented that that's not how it turned out.
Okay.
That's where I was going.
Okay, I'm just gonna finish, I don't, I don't like to butt in.
No, that's fine.
Until the end. I'm gonna hitchhike on that then. If somebody wanted to if a developer wanted to ensure that this was gonna be open lands in perpetuity, would they not put a conservation easement on that on those 3 properties?
Or deed restriction.
Or a deed restriction or something?
Or could have been a deed restriction, could have come back to amend the plat of subdivision and actually dissolved these lots and made it an outlot.
Okay.
And that was not done.
Okay.
It was not done.
Well, we just ruled on Old Main under, roughly similar circumstance. The building had to come down for them to be able to do what they wanted to do with the property.
Right.
That was a condition of the entire
Okay.
effort, so.
Commissioner Lay?
Yeah, Kathy, I want to follow up on that. The clarity of the 1998 acceptance resolution, as Mr. Anderson just said, it's pretty clear in here, at least to me, or as the reader of this, that the city wasn't going to hold this in perpetuity, because it had 2 conditions under which the city could sell them. My question is this: in your discussions with the folks who are here tonight or their predecessors, Was there any lack of understanding on their part as to the clarity or lack thereof of this resolution?
I can't speak to their understanding. I can say that I think at that time, the Plan Commission certainly identified these lots as serving a purpose as a buffer. However, when this got to the City Council, their donation was accepted with those limitations,
Right.
that a future council would have the ability to sell these
Right.
if they determined that it would be appropriate. There was never a proposal put before the council to create an outlot out of these or to put a restriction on the deed. They were donated to the city.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cushman?
Well, I would have to agree with a couple things that Commissioner Anderson just said, and it does not appear to be unclear that the city had options to dispense with the property at some future date. I'm still baffled by a process that we appear to have that requires a rezoning of a property, piece of property, in order to affect a potential disposition that could ultimately end up being the exact same circumstance that it presently finds itself in under the current zoning. So, I would like to see this body have some discussion with the city attorney and an explanation as to why that would be necessary,
Well, I
unless we
think
can do it right now.
Another piece of that is that the council has been talking about this since 2005. There has been correspondence, there has been meetings. I think the council at this point feels that there needs to be some action to actually come to a decision about the properties.
But we understand, the present circumstance, we understand the present economic circumstance that we find ourselves in. We have an inventory, a fairly substantial inventory of unsold homes in the area. I can't imagine that we have a laundry list of developers just waiting for this rezoning effort to step in and start acquiring and building on these properties. So can we not take an extra 30 days, get some clarification on exactly what the issue is, and engage through various community groups a more formative discussion into what our options are?
You certainly can delay action. The council has been involved in this issue since 2005. The council has attempted to engage in those discussions. The council has directed us to bring before you a recommendation for rezoning. So recommending approval, recommending denial, either of those would still go to the city council and could allow them to make the further decision. But ultimately what happens to these properties is a council decision. And this is one step in what they feel is an important next step to facilitate that discussion that's been going on now for a number of years.
Okay.
Commissioner Ziccarelli?
Yes. In preparation for the meeting, I took a drive down Wedgwood as well as Stratford Court, the two streets that border the property, as well as going behind LTD through the parking lot, just to get some kind of perspective as to where the lots were in relation to the property behind them. And I'll just share my perspective of how I found things and how we've seen on Google Maps and after visiting both the front and the rear of the property. It doesn't appear as though lot 22 actually borders the south edge of Wedgwood. It stops short, its property boundary. Lot 23 borders actually a green space that has a retention pond on it, and lot 24 borders a parking lot. And actually the high density of loading docks is further east, directly behind the eastern half of the first Oak Knoll property. It appears to me, from what I recall of both the site visit as well as looking on a map. I don't doubt the public testimony that there have been lawsuits, that there is noise, that there is light concerns, but I'm still not convinced that these three parcels are key if the loading dock is the majority of the cause of the problems. And so I just wanted to share that perspective because I've heard kind of testimony both ways, and that's what I have found so far.
Okay. Let me see, most of my questions have been answered. I mean, LTD for sure is in Bannockburn, yes?
Yes.
Simple question, right? Right. One question, and it really doesn't, it's more curious, because it doesn't really deal with the zoning, is, let's assume that, or let me say, if the zoning is approved, and then this goes before the city, does it ever come back to the Plan Commission?
Keep in
Yes.
mind-
When Open Lands or the homeowners association cuts a deal, then it would
Well,
have to come
not
back to us.
not necessarily,
Well,
Commissioner
keep in
Cushman.
mind that
Possibly.
if you recommend
Uh-huh,
rezoning,
yes.
the city council would need to adopt an ordinance. The city council, for instance, could hear your recommendation and approve first reading of an ordinance without finalizing it. That would not affect the zoning, but perhaps it would set the stage and a clear intention for what the council intends to do, and perhaps that would move some of the discussions along about some options. So that the council would be in control of when the zoning actually became effective. So theoretically, if this got to the council, they did first reading of an ordinance, and the council generally said, yes, we want to support residential zoning, but direct the staff to meet again with the homeowners association. They would not need to consider final reading of the ordinance in any particular time frame. So this then puts the next step really in the control of the city council and gives them perhaps the tools they need to fully explore the various options, which could include the 3 lots perhaps becoming 2 lots. If the council decided to move in that direction, yes, this would come back to the city council, or I'm sorry, to the Plan Commission for an amendment to the plat of the subdivision. Or if the council struck a deal with the homeowners association, this would come back to this Plan Commission for an amendment to the plat to create an outlot. So there are various scenarios with this, again, that have been discussed and kind of thrown around for more than 5 years. So this is really a step that allows the council to at least tentatively move forward and not necessarily pull the trigger on the rezoning.
Kathy, how can the Plan Commission be assured that the homeowners association will have, I mean, there's a lot of grievances here, and there's a lot of who struck John. So we're sitting up here going, I don't know, I don't know truth from fiction, quite frankly. I mean, this goes back to, 06, I've heard, so we're talking 6 years ago, for goodness sakes. How can we be assured that, the Plan Commission be assured that the homeowners association will have a forum, not only to air their grievances, but to also get a chance to negotiate an acceptable compromise? Now, I know I've got the cart way in front of the horse on this thing. But it seems like the issue to me, most of the conversation is not about the rezoning. It's about, well, I know you're gonna sell it, and these are the reasons, blah, 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 blah. All of it is, most of the testimony and the conversation has been about really the disposition. And these conversations would normally come to the forefront when you were looking at a developer's proposal or whatever. But again, I would like to be assured that the homeowners association had an opportunity to, again, air their grievances, negotiate an acceptable compromise, if in fact that's possible. How could we assure that?
Along with whatever recommendation, if you were to recommend approval or recommend denial of the zone change, you could, it wouldn't be a condition of approval, because it's not a special use permit, but you could forward to the city council a recommendation, and I'll just say, in support of the rezoning, with a further recommendation, and I was just typing here as you were talking, a recommendation that says something like, the Plan Commission heard clearly from representatives of the Homeowners Association a willingness and interest to continue to be involved in discussions of exploring alternatives for these properties that preserve them as a buffer for the residential neighborhood. And you could forward a recommendation to the city council. You couldn't require, but you're recommending to the city council. So you could say, continue to work with the Homeowners Association to fully explore all alternatives.
With the homeowners association.
Kathy, could we, if we would choose to do that, may we put a suggested time limit, such as a certain number of days? Is that appropriate, or are we in a summertime period here in which that's risky?
Right. I think it's tough to try and restrict the city council too much. I think if you send the message that you've heard some valid concerns from the Homeowners Association, you've heard an interest and a willingness from them to continue to be part of these discussions, and there seem to be some options that haven't been fully explored. And before maybe the language is before the council approves final reading of an ordinance rezoning the properties, maybe that's the time frame you tie it to, before they approve final reading of the ordinance, that you encourage some further discussion.
But Kathy, where's that forum for that? I mean, who, is that then the city council is instructing staff to work with the homeowners association, or is
That
this
would
the
be-
forum again?
That would be up to the city council.
Okay.
The city council has a subcommittee, a property and public land subcommittee, those members of the city council are responsible for the disposition of publicly owned property. So, maybe you include that in your recommendation, that you encourage the city council to consider directing the Property and Public Lands Committee to meet with interested property owners or representatives of the Homeowners Association to fully explore options for the properties.
Okay, would you noodle through that while we're, commission discussion and comment?
I'll be the guinea pig.
Okay.
I would,
Final
present.
discussion and comment.
at present, while I understand the direction that that the council would like to see this take, I am not presently comfortable recommending a rezoning of the property absent that additional discussion between the Property and Public Lands Committee and members of potentially interested acquirers of the property. If, however, those discussions can't occur because of some legal circumstance that I'm not aware of, and I can't imagine why that would be the case, but if that were true, then I'm perfectly willing to be told why and have another discussion at our next meeting and advance the potential rezoning of the property. But right now, I'm not comfortable with it. It seems entirely unnecessary right now, given all the comments that I've heard today.
Commissioner Ziccarelli?
I sit here feeling that if we send it to the city council, we're a little incomplete in that should it best be served, and maybe Kathy, this is a question for you, best be served as a continuance and continue to work with staff and bring it back to the Plan Commission without going to the city council? if we bring it to the city council with conditions, is it like, well, what did the plan commission do? You know? Just as a question, as of the process, I suppose, that we should best follow.
What I hear, the unfinished business is really related to the disposition of the property, which is not the purview of the plan commission. The city council has already identified this as surplus property. They have for years talked about different options. I believe at one time the homeowners association made an offer to the city council to purchase the 3 lots for a very low sum, and that wasn't something the council was willing to proceed with. So it seems like the unfinished business is related to the disposition, which is not something that's going to be solved at this level. The plan commission has no purview. We have had a number of meetings with the neighbors. We have had various correspondence. I don't know that any staff has no authority to, other than, hear again the grievances, which we have heard many times, and talk about the options. We have no ability to solve that before we bring it back to the plan commission. The city council said, we want to move this forward. We've been talking about this long enough. Let's proceed with the rezoning. But maybe a condition or a recommendation from the plan commission saying, there's interest, there's willingness. We encourage you not to grant final approval of this ordinance until there's some further discussion.
Okay. Commissioner Anderson.
I guess I'm in a place where I think I could go forward with the rezoning with conditions, and there are 2. One is the one that we were just talking about in terms of fully exploring options with the interested parties, obviously the homeowners association. And then the second one is picking up on something that I saw in the report from staff about the barrier, the wooded barrier designation that would go along with this to serve as a buffer. I would want to have both those conditions put on. One is more a process condition, the other is more of a real condition to the property. But hearing Augie's comments about the property in relationship to the area south of there, I frankly don't feel as though, if the issue here is we're not going to get into the discussion around disposition, then I look at that and say, then with those conditions in mind, I can accept going forward with a rezoning.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Michael.
Well, I have to say that I completely empathize with the public testimony heard here tonight about the need to be careful whatever happens here. And I think the only way that this is going to move forward is, and I will support a motion if we get one, a recommendation to rezone with the 2 conditions of my fellow commissioners. One is that there be the city enter in good faith negotiations on this and not rezone it until those have been exhausted, along with the other condition that Commissioner Anderson. I think that let's get off the dime here. I know there's been lots of discussions, but I think that if there's some urgency to the discussions, we'll get somewhere this time. And I would expect that the council committee and the city council as a whole will certainly listen to the interests of the neighborhood.
Okay. I agree with Commissioner Lay. And the homeowners association may not like that, but I truly believe that the only way that you're going to get a seat at the table is by moving this forward. You say that nobody has been responding, maybe because there was no sense of urgency. Or maybe there was a complacency, on your part, or no follow-up. I have no way of knowing. I just have no way of knowing. I do know that bringing this thing, the only way to bring this thing to a head would be to move this zoning forward. The city, with the conditions, that they deal with you. That they deal with you and hopefully come to an acceptable compromise. And deal with all the other issues regarding LTL, which are really disposition issues. So I think delaying this would be delaying this. And it's essentially been delayed for how many years? And it's gotten absolutely nowhere. So continuing on with the same program, to me, is going to yield the same results. So,
If I may just ask
Of course,
one last
of
question.
course,
So
of course.
it is, right now, there is an ordinance on the books that does not allow the city to market this asset in its present zoning condition.
It is not an ordinance, it is an adopted, it is the city's disposition of land policy, and it talks about the steps the council will follow.
Okay. And is there any reason why this body wouldn't consider sending a recommendation back to the city council that policy be amended, as opposed to a rezoning of the assets right now?
Is that our role?
No.
I don't think it's our role, Jeff, and I don't think it matters. I just don't think it matters. Sure, could we do it, and maybe they would, but who cares? I mean, we're
It
gonna,
allows them to do everything that they're asking us to allow them to do.
it's really not our role. If that's their process, that's their, that's their process. It's,
It's fair. I'm asking.
yeah.
Based on your discussion, I can offer some language.
That would be helpful.
And I don't know whether you will have a motion recommending approval or denial of the zone change.
I understand.
But two conditions based on your comments. The first, prior to final approval of an ordinance affecting the rezoning of the three properties, the Property and Public Lands Committee of the City Council should enter into good faith discussions with representatives of the Homeowners Association to explore opportunities that will allow the properties to remain as a buffer to the Wedgewood and Oak Knoll subdivisions. Condition number two, Plan Commission recommends establishment of a 50-foot tree preservation easement on the, along the south property line for the purpose of preserving trees and serving as an ongoing buffer.
Would that be for lot 22 as well? Because 22, putting that restriction on there, does that really do any good? I'm not sure.
So it could be.
So that's
for
specific to
two-
23 and
two
24.
properties.
Why wouldn't you do the whole thing?
Well, there is no south property line,
Right.
22. That's the
Where's
problem.
22?
There's a-
It's the one that goes up on an
Point.
angle.
Oh, I'm
Not a-
sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
And we could augment that language to not only say tree preservation, but as was suggested, assuring a buffer, requiring replacement plantings if trees are removed. Which would be consistent with other tree preservation
Kathy,
easement areas.
where have there's no mention, there was one mention of aldermen going back to, shoot, it's a name I never heard of, so it's gotta be 4 to 6 years
Mary Ann
ago.
Vaqueric, yes.
Where have the aldermen?
The aldermen have been very involved in these discussions.
They
The
have
aldermen make up the Planning and Preservation Committee.
Oh.
The aldermen make up the
So
Property and
like,
Public Lands Committee.
So Alderman
Um,
Edelman would, and.
They have been
before-
apprised of this, of all the discussions that have gone on, of all the studies, and it is their recommendation to the city council that we pursue this zone change that the
Sure.
city council endorsed, and that's why we're here. So
Sure.
this is not a staff-driven,
Wouldn't
driven
Mayor Cowie was Fourth Ward, no? Fourth Ward Alderman?
yes.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Yeah, various aldermen have been involved and
Okay.
received correspondence on these over an
Okay.
extended period of time.
All right, okay. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion with the wording. I just want to be sure that for the first condition, that we be as strong, as clear as possible on pursuing all options with the homeowners association. I think we just said pursuing opportunities. It felt a little bit light to me, so I want to put a little bit more strength around all options being considered by the homeowners association, if that makes sense. And along with the other condition around the barrier, the wooded barrier, that would be attached to our recommendation to the council. Make sense? So I make that motion. And then you want me to clarify that further?
I'd like it to be reread.
Yeah, that would be good.
Prior to final approval of an ordinance affecting the rezoning of the three properties, the Property and Public Land Committee of the City Council should enter into good faith discussions with representatives of the homeowners association to pursue all options, to explore the or you said to explore all
To
options.
explore all
so I
options,
inserted
or at
that
least
instead of
considered by the
explore
homeowner, yeah,
opportunities.
right.
To explore all options for preserving the three lots as a buffer to the Wedgewood and Oak Knoll subdivisions. To preserve all options. Is that-
To me, it felt, just opportunities felt too loose. So maybe it's all options sounds sort of in the eyes of God, but.
Would you limit it to the homeowners association, or also mention any other entity potentially
Yeah, that's
preserving
probably
the
true. We don't want to
property
limit it
for
to, it could be open lands.
Yeah, I mean, just another question.
I just need to hear that thing read.
Prior to final approval of an ordinance affecting the rezoning of the three properties, the Property and Public Land Committee of the City Council should enter into good faith discussions with all interested parties? Is that, rather than the homeowners association, is that what I heard?
Well, I would say, I want to be sure that the homeowners association is included.
I would
With-
limit it to the homeowners association,
Or neighboring interests.
yes. I would,
With representatives
homeowners
of the
association or
homeowners
neighboring
association
interests. That's
and
good.
Or neighboring interests.
neighboring interests, to pursue all options for preserving the properties as a buffer to the Wedgewood and Oak Knoll subdivisions.
What does that
Is that-
mean?
I don't, in the last part, is it all options for,
To pursue all options for preserving the properties as a buffer to the Wedgewood and Oak Knoll subdivisions.
I'm okay with that. I just,
I would say to preserve all options regarding open issues.
when you're saying around the disposition,
Pardon me?
you're saying relative to the disposition of the
No,
property
just-
in general?
just-
Okay.
To pursue all options relating to the disposition of the properties?
Yes,
I think that's what you're trying to get
to
to.
any disposition of the property.
That's a better way of saying it.
Again?
Please.
Prior to final approval of an ordinance affecting the rezoning of the three properties, the Property and Public Land Committee of the City Council should enter into good faith discussions with representatives of the homeowners association and interested neighbors to pursue all options for any disposition of the properties?
No.
To pursue all options related to disposition of the
That
properties?
might be related to the disposition of the property.
Yeah. And I'll second that.
Well, but I'd like it read, I want it,
Okay.
I really want to make sure I'm okay with this.
Make sure you read both conditions, please.
Am I reading it again?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Prior to final approval of an ordinance affecting the rezoning of the three properties, the Property and Public Land Committee of the City Council should enter into good faith discussions with representatives of the homeowners association and interested neighboring property owners to pursue all options related to the disposition of the properties. And the second condition,
That might be related to the disposition of the property. Of the of the properties.
to pursue all options that might be related to the disposition of the properties.
Yes?
And Plan Commission further recommends establishment of a 50-foot tree preservation area on the south side of the two properties, with the requirement that replantings occur to retain the existing density.
Density of the woods, the trees, or, okay.
We actually have a definition of tree preservation area in our code, and I'm not capturing it exactly, but it talks about preserving the trees, and it mentions that tree removal can only occur with approval by the city arborist, and that appropriate replacement needs to be required. And I think that's what I heard you say, not only preservation, but also replanting.
And we, just to be clear, that's on lots 23 and 24.
Correct.
All right, we have a motion on the table, which Ms. Zerniak is going to read one more time before there's a second, before there's a possible second.
Prior to whatever recommendation you make, the Plan Commission's recommendation is conditioned upon two recommendations. The first being prior to final approval of an ordinance affecting the rezoning of the three properties, the Property and Public Land Committee of the City Council should enter into good faith discussions with representatives of the Homeowners Association and interested neighboring property owners to pursue all options that might be related to the disposition of the properties.
Okay.
The Plan
So
Commission.
just to be clear, on the front end of that, all we have to say, our recommendation is in fact specific to the rezoning of the three properties from OA to R4.
Yes, I didn't want to
You gotta-
presume whether you were going to recommend approval or recommend denial. But yes, there would be, the first part of that, that would say the Plan Commission recommends approval or denial of the zone change,
So in our case, I think
to the
what we
city
recommending
council.
was recommend approval of the zoning change.
conditioned upon the following.
Got it.
And the second condition would be the Plan Commission recommends establishment of a 50-foot tree preservation area on the south side of lots 23 and 24. Tree removal may only occur with prior approval by the city arborist and fulfillment of requirements for replantings to achieve the same density of the woodland area.
That sounds like the motion that I'm making.
Congratulations. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries.
Motion carries. Motion carries. Kathy, is there not generally also a agenda item for, a final agenda item for other open items that may come before the commission this evening?
Agenda item number 5 is public testimony on non-agenda items. Is that what you're referring to?
No, usually at the end, after we finish with the, yes, okay. Next agenda item is public testimony and non-agenda items. Being none, I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Okay, second? Second.
Second.
Second, all in favor? Opposed? Okay, thank you.